A quorum being present, the Committee on Education and the Workforce will come to order. Good morning, everybody. Welcome to our witnesses and to our guests. There are few issues more important to the strength of the nation's economy than education. In most cases, an individual's success in the workforce depends upon his or her success in the classroom. Each month, the national unemployment data reflect this reality. While today 9% of the workforce is unemployed, over 14% of adults without a high school diploma are looking for a job. The numbers are more startling when compared to college graduates, who are currently experiencing an unemployment rate of over 4%. The challenges brought on by an inadequate education aren't just reserved for the unemployed. They extend to those with a job as well. In 2009, workers without a high school diploma earned less than $23,000, while workers with a bachelor's degree earn nearly 3 times that amount. These statistics remind us of the challenges facing workers who do not succeed academically. Without a doubt, education is critical to the strength of America's workforce and economy. That is why the current state of our nation's education system is so troubling. Only 69% of students earn their high school diploma. According to the nation's report card, an 8th grade student has only a 30% chance of being able to read at grade level. Reading and math scores for teens on the verge of graduation remain largely unchanged since 1973. Students who do graduate are often unprepared to compete in the workforce. Employers continue to express their concerns that new workers too often lack basic skills in reading, writing, and math. As we consider these disturbing trends, we can't ignore that over the last 45 years, the federal government has become increasingly involved in the day-to-day operation of our schools. We have all heard a teacher or parent describe how rules imposed by Washington often stifle innovative solutions taking place in the classroom or undermine the freedom to choose a school that best fits a child's needs. We can no longer accept a status quo that says Washington has all the answers and more money will fix a broken education system. Since 1980, federal spending on education has increased by 425%, yet student achievement has failed to improve. Clearly, the current system isn't working. It is time we stop measuring our commitment to education solely by the dollars we spend. The good news is that the tide is turning. Dedicated reformers, concerned citizens, and gifted filmmakers have sparked a debate that is spreading across the country. Their efforts have awakened a desire for a new approach to education in the country. State and local communities are moving forward with innovative solutions to improve accountability, parental involvement, results-based hiring, and school choice. Washington should not stand in the way of these and other meaningful reforms that improve the quality of education for our children. That is why we're here today. Congress must understand the challenges facing our education system, hear the concerns of state and local leaders intimately involved with what goes on in the classroom, and begin to chart a different course that ensures the innovation and accountability being driven now at the local level can succeed. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses and will now yield to the ranking member, Mr. Miller, for his opening statement.
Thank you for yielding, and I also want to thank you, our former member of this committee, our colleague Jared Paulus from Colorado, was asked to sit with the committee today because of his ongoing interest in education, and thank you for agreeing to have him sit with the committee. Today's hearing is our first education hearing in this new Congress, and I believe it's a very important one. As we look forward to reauthorizing the Elementary and Secondary Education Act, it's critical that we continue to take a look at where we are nationally and locally in terms of both progress we have made and the problems that continue to persist. The economic situation we are facing in this country also calls for us to take stock of what is going on in the classrooms across the nation. The children sitting in our classrooms today are the workforce of tomorrow. And we have both good and bad news to report about our public education system. The good news is that our focus and support of education over the last 10 years has led to real and significant improvements for children and academic achievement. We have seen increases in both reading and math scores. We have seen achievement gaps narrow in our elementary and middle grades between African American and white students and between high and low poverty communities. But the gaps still exist, and in some rural and urban communities, the achievement gap is so persistent that many of our children are in grave jeopardy, which many consider a threat to our nation and to our economy. This is a threat to our competitiveness and even to our security. Of the 30 industrialized countries, the U.S. ranks 12th in reading literacy, 17th in science, and 25th in math. The difference between the countries at the top of the international rankings and our country is that the countries at the top have made a national goal to develop the best education system in the world. And I want to point out in those countries have focused on all students. While our top 10% of students remain competitive with their peers internationally, the U.S. falls flat when it comes to educating poor and minority students. It is clear that our economy will not be strong if our education of all students is not a clear priority. Nearly 600,000 students dropped out from the class of 2008, according to the Alliance for Excellent Education. If only half of these students had graduated together, they would earn some $4.1 billion in additional wages in the course of an average year, and their incomes would help grow local revenues by $535 million in an average year. The fate of our national economy rests with the combined strength of the economies of local communities. These local communities rely on an educated and well-trained workforce. More needs to change so that our students will become the next engineers, entrepreneurs, and teachers. A recent study of the workforce shows that demand for workers with college education will outpace currently the supply by some 300,000 individuals per year. By 2018, our colleges and universities will have produced 3 million fewer graduates than demanded by the workforce. The problem in our education systems are even keeping young men and women from defending our nation. They don't have the reading, math, and science problem-solving abilities to take and pass the military enlisted exam. So the question really is, where do we go from here? This country is too great and has too much potential to be a second tier in education internationally. What our students need to succeed isn't a mystery. We took important steps forward with No Child Left Behind, calling on communities to be transparent about the achievement of all children. But much of that act is now outdated, and now we need to take the next steps to give greater flexibility at the local level in exchange for setting high goals for all children and less prescription at the federal level. We need an accountability system that works and refuses to let any student slip through the cracks. We must set high goals and achievement for all students, and that includes poor and minority students, we know this list well, English learners, and students with special needs, all students in the United States, and provide them with challenging and rigorous learning environments tied to college and career-ready standards. They need creative, effective teachers to hold them to high goals and standards, and that can adjust their teaching strategies as needed during the day, during the school year. 10 years after No Child Left Behind was enacted, the law is in need of major update. I'm confident that we will be able to get this done this year. We have really no other choice but to do it, and I look forward to hearing from our witnesses what we can do to improve our education system and make it easier for our local jurisdictions to carry out the intent of the Congress and the hopes of this nation. Thank you very much, and I want to thank the witnesses for joining us.
I thank the gentleman. This is probably one of those occasions where we could just exchange each other's speeches. It doesn't happen often. It doesn't happen often, and may not happen down the road, but we're united.
The negativity is so right.
All right. Pursuant to Committee Rule 7C, all committee members will be permitted to submit written statements to be included in the permanent hearing record. And without objection, the hearing record will remain open for 14 days to allow such statements and other extraneous material referenced during the hearing to be submitted in the official hearing record. It's now my pleasure to introduce our distinguished panel of witnesses, and I will go through and introduce each of you and all of you together before we start into the testimony. Dr. Tony Bennett serves as the Indiana Superintendent of Public Instruction, where he has pushed for drastic education reform. Prior to his election as superintendent, Dr. Bennett served as principal of Scottsburg Senior High School and spent 9 years in the classroom as a science teacher. He also is one of the founders of the Chiefs for Change, a group of education leaders formed to promote school choice and performance-driven evaluations for teachers and principals. Ms. Lisa Graham Keegan is the founder of the Education Breakthrough Network, a coalition of organizations and individuals dedicated to promoting school choice. Over the years, she has advocated for conservative approaches to education reform, including an emphasis on standardized testing and school choice initiatives such as school vouchers, tuition tax credits, charter schools, and open enrollment policies. Mr. Andrew J. Coulson is the director of Cato's Center for Educational Reform. Previously, he was a senior fellow in education policy at the Mackinac Center for Public Policy. Mr. Coulson also serves on the advisory council of the E.G. West Center for Market Solutions in Education at the University of Newcastle, United Kingdom, and has written for several academic journals, including the Journal of Research in the Teaching of English, the Journal of School Choice, and the Education Policy Analysis Archives, and for newspapers such as the Wall Street Journal and the Washington Post. Mr. Ted Mitchell is the president and CEO of New Schools Venture Fund, a nonprofit philanthropic organization that raises private funds from education entrepreneurs to fund innovative K-12 projects around the country. From 2008 through 2010, he also served as president of the California State Board of Education. Prior to taking the helm at New Schools in 2005, Mr. Mitchell served as president of Occidental College in Los Angeles, as deputy to the president at Stanford University, as vice chancellor and dean of the School of Education and Information Studies at the University of California, Los Angeles, and as professor and chair of the Department of Education at Dartmouth College. Welcome to all of you, and it's a very distinguished panel. We're very happy to have all of you here. Just very briefly, a reminder, I know this was explained, but for the benefit of all, including my colleagues, who sometimes turn colorblind on me, you have some little boxes in front of you that will have lights. When you start your testimony, a green light will come on, and that will be on for 4 minutes. It will turn yellow for a minute to give you an indication that it's time to start wrapping up your testimony, and then it'll turn red, and that'll indicate that the 5 minutes are up. As I promised each of you, I don't intend to gavel anybody down in the middle of a sentence or thought, but please take that red light as the indication that it's time to wrap that up. And I will just take this opportunity to remind my colleagues that we also will have the 5-minute rule. We'll have 5 minutes in which to ask our questions and have them answered. There's some skepticism among my.
Went pretty well yesterday.
Well, it went pretty well yesterday. Not exactly perfect. So we will start, and we'll go right down the line. And Dr. Bennett, you're recognized.
Thank you. Thanks for having me today, Chairman Klein. It's an honor to be here, and it's an honor to partake in a discussion that I think is the most important discussion we have going on in our nation, and that is the future of our nation through the education of our children. When I took office in 2009, we immediately set out a very aggressive plan in Indiana that said the academic achievement and career preparation of all Indiana students would be the best in the United States and on par with the most competitive countries around the world. And we then had to do something a little different. We had to evaluate the landscape. And I think I have a slide that is for your reference that's here that I'm going to just give a quick side comment. Our staff kind of tripped me up. I refer to this usually as Indiana's Education Mess. They didn't like the name, so they put Indiana's Education Challenges. They thought you would like it better. But this gives all of you an idea of what we were looking at, what we have been looking at in Indiana. And I think there are some very stark realities here. I think when you evaluate that picture, you're going to see academic achievement issues, you're going to see cultural issues, you're going to see structural issues that we believe we have to address. Now, the reason I bring that to you is when you talk about a system that has academic achievement problems, cultural problems, and structural problems, something should come to mind. We have to have comprehensive reform. In education, for many years, we've tried to do this thing we called reform by doing one thing at a time, and it hasn't worked. It's given us minimal results. So we believe to approach this issue and to approach the complexity of these issues, we must do this with comprehensive education reform in Indiana. And so if we can go to the next slide very quickly, you will see that in Indiana we will create and promote a statewide culture of academic excellence in which, and this we have this on a scoreboard in the State House atrium and in a scoreboard on my office with our term winding down in days, hours, minutes, and seconds that says 90% of our students will pass both the English language arts and math portions of the state's examinations. 25% of our graduates will graduate with advanced placement, international baccalaureate, or dual credit, and 90% of our students will graduate with a meaningful high school diploma. So we have that again on a scoreboard with all our critical statistics leading to that shows us the sense of urgency with which we must address those issues you saw on the first slide. So let's talk for a moment about what we've done about comprehensive education reform. First of all, Indiana today, it was announced yesterday, leads the nation in access to advanced placement exams, with more minority students taking those exams than ever before. We also reformed teacher licensing, making it easier for mid-career changers to come into the field of education, giving more flexibility to our teachers in terms of professional development leading to relicensure. We developed a growth model with the help of Colorado where we are able to show how students grow year over year. And we have a transparent way of showing school performance growth, and in the future, parents will be able to see the growth of the teachers their children will have, and today, parents will be able to see the growth of their own children year over year. And finally, sadly, in 2011, at the end of this school year, the state will be prepared to potentially intervene with 20 of Indiana's chronically underperforming schools. We have more than 24,000 Hoosier students in these schools. We have a very aggressive reform agenda where we will put an emphasis on teacher quality. We will give schools flexibility and hold them very accountable. I believe accountability without flexibility is punishment, and we have to give folks flexibility to meet high standards and be competitive. And finally, we want to give all children options of charter schools, non-government schools, to pursue educational opportunities that meet their needs. We also want to cut out the red tape. We have a red tape waiver in our legislation right now to remove red tape, and we would like to see the federal government do something similar. Set some guidelines, set high expectations, give us the resources, and hold us accountable by taking those resources away if we don't hit the target. And finally, let's talk about funding, because this is a very important piece. There's another slide here. Chairman Klein, you mentioned the federal investment in education. This is Indiana state investment. And as you can see, our I-STEP, which is our state standardized testing, is flat over the last 10 years. I think there's a very important 2 points here. In 2009, you actually see the line dip when the line for funding goes up. We cut our budget by $300 million in 2010, and the red line went up. What that tells us is in Indiana, we're answering the question not how you get more money to education, but how you get more education for your money. And we're doing that by starting a discussion where we marry fiscal policy and education policy. Far too frequently, we have discussions about how to fund education without having discussions about what we expect from education. So we believe that, again, we would love to see a situation where the federal government allows us to have a set of guidelines, gives us incredible flexibility, puts high expectations on us, and holds us very accountable if we don't meet those expectations. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Ms. Keegan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members. It's an honor to be here. What I would like to do is talk a little bit about the individuals who are actually creating the transformation in education in the country. The task or the challenge before us is enormous, and Mr. Miller described it well. It's been a long time that we've been focusing on it, and it can feel overwhelming until you look very closely at a significant transformation that's underway in the country, who's doing it, how they're doing it, and I would suggest that following their lead is the best course of action any of us can take at this point. My organization, Education Breakthrough Network, was actually made possible by the past 20 years, and it was made necessary as well because there isn't one thing that's happening. There's not just one thing. We're moving in all sorts of directions. We're moving in terms of school choices for public charter schools. Online learning technology is driving this in incredible ways. We've created tutoring programs, scholarship programs. Homeschooling has burgeoned in these past 20 years. Really a phenomenal growth in the transformation of American education, and I think it's really important to understand as you go about the business of updating a law that got passed 10 years ago, how different the landscape is even in these past 10 years. The transformation is marked by not by politics, not by a particular group of people. One of the things about Breakthrough we like best is that I think within 30 seconds, anybody in the country could see somebody they know and trust on that page. Democrats, Republicans, African Americans, Latinos, white folks, everybody. It's quite a mix, American education transformation. What's common to it is a belief that we can and we should have our students be leaders academically in the world. No excuses, no apology, no other agenda. That has to get done, and these folks have been about the business of making it happen. The simplest description of what's happening is that states are moving away from simple assignment of their kids into schools. They're moving away from one school that's going to serve all needs, one set of rules that's going to govern all people in the school district, and moving into specialization, most particularly allowing educators to take back the leadership role that our nation started with, quite frankly. Over the past 20 years, we've lost in assignment, we've lost the numbers to the point that now over a third of students do not attend the school they're assigned to. In Arizona last weekend, we had an article about a school district where 75% of parents are opting out of their assigned high school district. I would say at that point, choice has gone mainstream. And it's gone mainstream not just for students, but for teachers, which is as it should be. When we started public education, we relied on the teacher. The teacher to start the school, manage the school, run the school. The teacher has never been anything but the most important factor in any school. That has never changed. What's changed is how effective we allowed that teacher to be. All sorts of illogical constraints on personnel, on what a teacher can do, when she can do it, or he can do it, excuse me, gentlemen. What they can do, with whom, hiring who, how they associate with each other. We assign teachers into schools. We don't let them choose their schools or their specialty. In 2011, in an age when specialty is everything, that seems illogical to me anymore, and it seems illogical to the thousands of educators who are bringing innovation to American education. Teachers are fighting their way back to the front of this exercise. All over the country, you have organizations, the New Teacher Project, New Leaders for New Schools, Teach for America, the American Association of Educators, the American Board for Certifying Teacher Excellence. These are teacher-led organizations for teachers, bringing teachers back into leadership, and it's been critically important. Every state now is creating a way for teachers to bring their skills directly into the education market, for teachers to bring their schools to the students that they serve. It's a fundamental difference. The one thing I think is very important to talk about is as you go about your business, it's always refreshing to hear that you hesitate to get in the way of local control. Unfortunately, where education is concerned, local lost out to control a long time ago. Local control looks like national organizations whose power far outweighs individual school board members or often the power of the interests of the local communities they're supposed to serve. So it's one thing to say we want this to be local. It's another not to recognize that local officials are not always free to do what they think is the right thing. The innovation that has happened is that teachers who have started schools, who have brought new technologies, who have seen the promise of technology or of these new pathways, are what's local anymore. And we need to make sure we can follow them. We ask them, what is it that would help you do more of what you're doing? We take their advice and try to get out of their way. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Mr. Coulson, you're recognized.
Chairman Klein, members of the committee, thank you very much for the opportunity to speak with you today. For over half a century, a succession of Congresses and presidents has sought to do two things for American elementary and secondary education: raise overall achievement and narrow the gaps by income and by minority status. Roughly $2 trillion have been spent at the federal level since 1965 in pursuing these ends. In the next few minutes, I'll summarize the results. Congress's first effort to raise overall achievement was the National Defense Education Act of 1958, which focused on mathematics and science, as it was a response to the Soviet launch of the satellite Sputnik. As you can see on Figure 1, science scores, for this period we don't have data for, but math scores declined between 1955 and 1960, and that decline accelerated after the passage of the National Defense Education Act. There is a beginning of an uptrend after 1966, which looks promising, but sadly that uptrend was evanescent. It vanished in the coming years, as we can see in Figure 2, which charts mathematics, science, and reading scores from the earliest national trend data we have available from the National Assessment of Education Progress, along with the change, the percent change in real federal spending per pupil. And that's adjusted for inflation. Now, obviously, looking at that chart, it's pretty disappointing. Is there a possibility that state and local spending were going down at the same time that federal spending was going up? Maybe that offset the increased federal investment. To find out, I provided Figure 3, which charts total spending, the total cost, actually, of a K-12 public education in real dollars, how it's changed over time. As you can see, total spending, much like federal spending, has increased dramatically over the course of this period. Reading and mathematics scores are flat over that 40-year period for students at the end of high school. In science, scores have declined slightly. Science is that little purple line at the bottom. It trails off in 1999. I don't know if it was because bad news is no news, but we stopped testing in that series of science scores at the time. There is some other data from a different series of results that also shows a decline in science from 1995 to 2006. So what about the other federal goal in education at the elementary and secondary level? Compensatory education, closing the gaps. We don't have data for the achievement of kids from different economic backgrounds, but we do have data on the relative performance of the children of high school dropouts and the children of college graduates, which is a pretty good proxy for income. Those gaps at the end of high school between the kids of dropouts and the kids of college graduates have not changed in 40 years. I think there's a 1% uptick in one of the three subjects and the other two are flat. It's really a disappointing result. The one area out of all these goals the federal government has had that has shown some improvement is some of the minority white gaps. As you can see from Figure 4, the gap in reading, for instance, between black and white students at the end of high school has shrunk from its origin in 1969 or thereabouts. 1971, I think, is the year. But the timing of the gap closing does not support federal intervention as a likely cause. Virtually all of the shrinkage in the gap between black and white students in reading at the end of high school occurred in a single 8-year span from 1980 to 1988. Since that time, it has increased slightly. And this was a time, if you recall the chart on Figure 2, during which federal spending has skyrocketed. So to sum up, we seem to have gotten very little for the $2 trillion in federal education investments over the past half century. They do not appear to have achieved the goals they were set out to achieve. There is one notable exception to this very disappointing overall pattern, and that is the tiny and recently maligned Washington, D.C. Opportunity Scholarship Program. This program, which allows low-income students in Washington, D.C. to attend private schools, and which costs about $7,000 per pupil on average, produces equal or better academic results and substantially better, statistically significantly better graduation rates than are available in the D.C. public schools, and it does so at a quarter the cost of D.C. public schools. Extending and growing that program would be a fantastic example for the nation. And it's something that Congress can do, an affirmative thing Congress can do, which would have tremendous benefits. Now, D.C. is a special case. Congress grants special power to Congress over the district, but it delegates to the federal government no national education policy powers, reserving those to the states and the people. Now, clearly that constitutional limit has not been observed for generations, but in light of the evidence I've just presented, its wisdom is inescapable. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions very much.
Thank you. Mr. Mitchell, please.
Thank you, Chairman Klein and Congressman Miller, members of the committee, fellow witnesses this morning. I applaud the bipartisan spirit with which I think we're all undertaking this discussion today, and I know that I'm very honored to be a part of it. I am here for the same reason that you all are. As Chairman Klein and Mr. Miller so eloquently said, and as my fellow witnesses have testified, we know that we need to improve outcomes for kids in America's schools. But the good news is that the country is filled with entrepreneurs, innovators, and systems leaders with bold ideas that can change children's lives. And the federal government matters in how many of these ideas come to fruition. I've seen this up close at the New Schools Venture Fund. As a nonprofit venture philanthropy firm, we seek out social entrepreneurs working to improve public education for low-income kids. We help those entrepreneurs grow organizations that achieve breakthrough results. And I've seen these same truths in my recent role as president of the California Board of Education. Here's an example. Aspire Public Schools was founded a decade ago on a college for certain philosophy, on attention to data and smart management. Today, that idea has turned into 30 public charter schools serving more than 10,000 largely poor and minority students. And last year, 100% of Aspire graduates were accepted to college. And Aspire is today the highest performing school system serving low-income kids in California. Or take Teacher U, which set out to transform teacher preparation in New York by focusing on results in the classroom. Last summer, Teacher U graduated its first cohort of teachers with something revolutionary: measurable evidence that they had helped their students advance a full grade or more in a year. We need more Aspires and more Teacher U's, yet reform remains an unnatural act in our school systems, which have their own Newtonian logic. To every good idea, there's well-financed opposition. My colleagues in the field need your help in making that fight fairer. That means playing a smart, limited role that helps local leaders and local entrepreneurs do things that are essential but politically difficult. Here are 3 examples of the unique role the federal government can and should play. First, government can continue to protect the unprotected by focusing on outcomes for low-income, minority, and special needs students. No Child Left Behind was not a perfect law, but the transparency created by requiring states to report student achievement by subgroup has been a powerful driver of reform. Please stay steadfast in that commitment. Second, you can foster innovation through targeted incentives that ensure we don't try to meet 21st century challenges with 19th century tools and policies. And innovation isn't just technology, it's new ideas that create better results. Innovators disrupt calcified systems, and they prove the possible through results, removing excuses and catalyzing change. And we know from experience that funding innovation works. Among the 200+ schools in our own portfolio, 91% of its graduates enroll in college. And as we have learned, targeted incentive funds drive policy innovation disproportionate to their cost and can create cover when reform is politically difficult at the local level. Often, parents' and kids' interests don't prevail at the local level. Incentives can help to combat systemic gridlock caused by entrenched interest groups. And finally, you can speed reform through your support of states as they transition to the voluntary common standards advanced by nearly 40 governors, which will establish a level playing field for all players, states, districts, schools, and service providers, allowing the best innovations to scale beyond state boundaries. Beyond these broad strokes, there are a few examples of specific policies that will advance innovation and help states and local communities, particularly underserved communities, dramatically raise outcomes for their students. First, please support and fund fully the Charter Schools program to support the growth of high-quality charters and support strong charter accountability for those that underperform. Second, please consider using Title II funds to drive the growth of smart and innovative teacher training organizations focused on results, and to drive the deployment of evaluation and pay systems for teachers that recognize performance. Third, help states clear away policies, such as fixed student-teacher ratios and seat time requirements that prevent the spread of effective technologies that are revolutionizing the way students learn and teachers teach. There's a smart, limited, vital role for the federal government to play in education. I hope that you'll embrace it with enthusiasm and move to reauthorize the Elementary and Secondary Education Act. Thanks again for the privilege of speaking with you today.
Thank you all for your testimony. We're going to move into a period of questions and answers in what appears to be a futile effort on my part to set an example. I'm going to start the clock for my own questioning and stick to that. If I keep setting that example, is it going to work, George? Maybe not.
I've always been a slow learner.
Dr. Bennett, let me start with you. You're doing some pretty tough things in Indiana, some amazing things. I have a number of questions here, some frankly proposed by the staff, some that I've been writing as we went through. So I want to touch on a couple of things, if I could. One, you mentioned that you're trying to put in place ways for people to make, I think you called it mid-career changes to teaching. Can you tell me how what you're doing and how that's working?
What we've done, Chairman, is really we revamped our entire teacher licensing system under we refer to it as the Indiana Professional Standards Board. The first thing we did was say that we were going to emphasize content so that chemistry teachers knew chemistry and history teachers knew history. But the other thing is to, if you will, provide more flexibility within the teacher licensing system to allow maybe a chemist from Eli Lilly to leave that position and find a way into Indiana schools to affect the lives of children. So it was really an opportunity for us to tap the talent in an economy where people may be leaving their jobs to come in and provide education to children with some different teacher licensing standards.
So you've made it easier for that chemist from Eli Lilly in your example who's decided they're either retiring from Eli Lilly, to continue the example, or they just have developed an interest in teaching to get licensed to teach in Indiana.
That's correct, and we've done that with teachers, principals, and superintendents.
Right. Well, I have great interest in that because I've always thought that we've missed a bet in a lot of cases where you have somebody who loves math and has spent their life in math. And they'd like to now take that love of math and the skill that they have and teach it and transfer it, and too often we've made that extremely difficult to do. So I'm always excited when I hear that there are efforts to allow that to happen much easier so that people aren't discouraged. I know many examples. When I retired from active duty in the Marine Corps and I established my home in Minnesota, I thought, well, I might want to substitute for a while. Seemed like a good thing to do, and I like to teach, and so I offered up that I might be interested to do that. When I was explained to me all the things I had to go through in order to be a substitute, it was so discouraging that I started farming instead. I don't know. But it shouldn't be that way. It shouldn't be that way. So I'm excited to hear about that. I was also interested in what you're doing to empower parents to perhaps have a parent trigger, which we've heard something. Can you talk about how that's working, that you're giving parents more control over what's happening with their schools?
Well, in our recent charter school bill that just passed our House, we have a parent trigger for parents 51% of the parents to trigger and bring a plan forward to remove a school from the school corporation and bring it in as a charter school or take it to a charter school. Yesterday, we presented a trigger for parents as it pertains to school accountability, which says if the school is in year 4 or 5, chronically underperforming under the state standards, D or F schools, the parents can then actually go to the State Board of Education and ask for accelerated intervention by the state, which gives the state an opportunity to step in and say, the parents are not pleased with the education happening here, and the state is going to intervene within the law, the state's accountability law.
You have a growth model that you have put in place, according to my notes here. It looks at student achievement, and it allows teachers that are moving students ahead 1.5 or 2.5 grades that they be recognized and that be highlighted. Two things quickly, as I'm running out of time. How do you think that's working? And then fundamentally for our concerns here, what in No Child Left Behind or in federal law is getting in your way?
Well, first, the growth model is a game changer for us. It truly is a game changer because we've had educators ask for many years, especially in our underperforming schools, let us show you that we're moving students. You know, not all children walk into 6th grade performing at 6th grade level. So let us show you that we're doing that, and the growth model does that. It also has been the catalyst for our teacher quality legislation that we are rolling out, which enables us to recognize and reward Indiana's great teachers, teachers who are driving growth. And I want to say something about our teacher quality bill. It's a locally driven bill. It is not the bill. We got into this thing when we went through our race to the top and we chose not to engage. What we learned was the state can't run all those evaluation systems. So our teacher quality bill sets guidelines and guardrails for local school corporations to become the centers of innovation in terms of teacher evaluation and teacher compensation based on multiple measures, one of which should be student growth.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. I guess I broke my own rule. Mr. Miller.
Like 5 minutes to me. Seems so short. Thank you very much, and thank you to the panel. Just to raise one point, I think when you look at student performance and you look at money, you want to say that somehow there should be some correlation there. I think that's wrong-headed, too. But I'd also make the point, I don't know exactly what was going on before because it was so well hidden, but after No Child Left Behind, millions of people were added to the test pool that were left out before. We know that on test day prior to No Child Left Behind, and we know that school districts fought like crazy not to have what is now the requirement that 95% of your students participate in the test. Those children were sent on field trips. They were told to go to the doctor. They were sent to the library, anywhere except in the testing room. Now they're in the pool. And so I don't think that. I think what's more important is how we're doing with younger students, how we're doing with 8th graders, how we're doing with 4th graders, and how that gap is being improved. So I just want to say I don't accept that. But more importantly here, I think is really for us as we anticipate going forward with the reauthorization, is Dr. Mitchell and Dr. Bennett, you have both talked about something that I think is going to be the most important part of this thing, is how we balance the flexibility, recognizing that in these 9 years, local education's changed dramatically from when the outset of the data we were trying to acquire in No Child Left Behind and the accountability. And that flexibility and balancing that with the accountability that we must insist, otherwise, once again, the creativity of local districts to hide students and to hide their performance. We've been whipping the top 10% the entire history of this nation, but we owe an obligation to the 100% of those students in that district. How do we balance that? Because when I tour big, complex districts, those superintendents have to partner with a significant number of other people, with the police department, with Parks and Recreation, with health organizations, to keep that population up and running, if you will, so that they can fully participate in the educational opportunity. They have to partner with charters. They have to partner with teacher organizations. They have to partner with teacher development organizations, with social entrepreneurs. But they're stuck with kind of money that, for a lot of reasons in the past, we directed directly to a particular school site. Now now what we see is very transient students for a whole host of reasons. They can be transited for no other reason than the internet. but they can also be transient because their parents work somewhere else and they have transportation and the opportunity to go to a school in a different part of a district. That's a big change. When we were sending when I came on this committee, we called radioactive dollars. They either follow that student or we rip them away from the district. That doesn't work in this very mobile educational forums that we want to be able to present and have students take advantage of, sometime multiple times during a single day. They can move to a different platform or a different site. And I just would like you both, to, on my remaining 5 or 6 minutes here, to comment on that balance of flexibility, because I just keep encountering superintendents that are really becoming very creative about marrying existing resources. I'm just talking about existing resources to providing that better educational opportunity.
Well, let me speak to that directly. First of all, what we did at our state board was we started a very quick and extensive deregulation. Indiana was the first state in the country to define a laptop computer as a textbook. And I think in doing so, we opened up a whole new world to maybe address what may be our society's next achievement gap. And that's the gap where students who have resources can learn to access technology and students who don't have resources cannot. And so we did that. We eliminated seat time requirements. We eliminated a lot of the structures that came to us that superintendents brought to us and says, we need you to get this out of our way. We also have reviewed over 100 data collections that the state requires, and we found at least 30 that that have nothing to do with student achievement. And the truth is, we have to get rid of that stuff.
I'm going to have to ask Mr. Mitchell because you only got a minute left.
So, I totally agree, and I think that one of the issues, certainly that we faced in California in California's budget crisis, was a problem that as dollars were shrinking, the requirements on what specifically to spend those dollars were staying firm, and so we were finding schools and districts in the state as a whole where categorical programs, siloed programmatic spending were preventing the kind of flexible use of funds that are required to do the right thing for kids. And I think that as I mentioned in my testimony, that continuing to shine a spotlight on student achievement, particularly those kids who have not been a part of the system before, providing resources, but flexible resources, whether that's federal resources or state resources to the local or local resources to the school, is a key to unlocking the innovative, creative spirit of teachers in classrooms, principals at school sites, and outside of schools, municipalities as well. And I think that flexibility in funding, high outcome goals that are clear to all is a very, very powerful combination.
Thank you. Dr. Bouchon.
Well, I'd just like to say first, it's a pleasure to have Dr. Bennett here from my home state of Indiana, and the rest of the panel. Thank you for your testimony. I'm going to direct my question first to Dr. Bennett and whoever wants to comment. And I grew up in a small town where not everybody valued education. I was at a very small school, but my parents did. And so when I started into the local school system, I already had in my mind as a student that achievement in school was going to give me opportunity, and that's why I'm here today. I continue to believe that we have a lot of students that when they come into school, they don't have expectations of themselves because of where they've grown up. Is there a way that we can do a better job, I guess, with our society in general, to help people recognize the importance of education so that when kids enter our school system and we're doing all these things to teach them, they already have the mindset that, look, if I don't get my education, this is where I'll be in life. If I do, this is what I may achieve. So, Dr. Bennett.
Well, I think first, Dr. Bouchon, I think we have to recognize first, and this pains me to say this, but the one thing I know I can't control is the home that child comes from. And that is sad. I mean, I think we all wish that every child came from a home that afforded that child with a great opportunity. But we have a school corporation on the east side of Indianapolis, Warren Township Schools. Their superintendent basically tells their staff every year there will be no excuses. These are the expectations, and our students will meet those expectations. They use an incredible continuous improvement model. They drive student growth. And then we have Charles Tinley Accelerated School in Indianapolis that literally has painted on the wall, in the most disadvantaged community in Indianapolis, go to college or die. We have to set those expectations from the top, and we have to make sure that instruction is driven with those expectations, because we can overcome what happens in the house.
If I could add also, there have been 3 very powerful films out in the past year. First was called The Cartel, then The Lottery, then Waiting for Superman. And it kind of puts it back on us. These families are desperately trying to get their children into schools that work for them. And I'm afraid what we've done in urban America in too many places, sometimes in very rural America, is we have created generational lack of expectation, and it was the school's fault. If you talk to Jeffrey Canada about this and what happened in Harlem, he blames that on education. If you repeatedly do not educate your families, then what you get is predictable. But it is not true, and I've never experienced in my opportunities in spending time with leadership in urban communities who are trying to work with families, I've never experienced families that didn't want this for their kids. I've certainly experienced the fact that doors were slammed in their face, and I think we have to take that pretty seriously.
I agree, and I think that where we sit, the overwhelming demand from parents for high-quality schools is the challenge to which we all need to respond. That said, I think it is true that there are schools that have low expectations, and there is no place in this debate for those schools. There's no place in that debate for leaders with low expectations for kids. If you were to ask me what is the single defining characteristic of all of the high-performing schools that we support, it's a culture of high expectations, and as Dr. Bennett said, a philosophy of no excuses. Kids come where they come from. It's our responsibility to move them to places that can address their dreams.
I would just add very briefly that good schools, truly good schools, can and do have a positive impact on students and even families' attitudes about learning and their expectations for what's possible. I've seen it, and it's truly amazing what's possible.
I give back the rest of my time. Thank you.
I thank the gentleman. Mr. Kildee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Mitchell, how can we modify the system that measures school performance to broaden out our method of determining progress? And how can we address the fact that a subgroup may keep a school from achieving AYP without neglecting our responsibilities to that subgroup?
It's a great question, sir. My sense, and we've talked about it a couple of times already, is that the broad adoption of growth models enables us to have a very different discussion about progress and a very different discussion about intervention. Growth model analysis holds schools and districts and states to high bars, but also allows us to identify and help provide supports for addressing the needs of particular subgroups. Below that, I think that assessment tools and technologies, and I'm not thinking about the end of the year summative tests, but I'm thinking about the formative tests that are now coming along, associated with everything from formal textbooks to digital learning materials, are helping teachers in classrooms improve their practice, adjust what they're doing with kids on a daily basis, and I believe that that is going to revolutionize the way we approach this.
Thank you very much. Dr. Bennett, I come from nearby, from Michigan, and I was a teacher there for 10 years in Michigan. How do you fold in your growth model into the other measurements for AYP? How do you merge them or meld them?
Actually, we're taking that in a different direction, sir. We are actually looking to remove our AYP from our state's accountability system. We just recently we're in the rulemaking process to grade all Indiana schools A through F, as opposed to the fuzzy descriptors that we have. And that A through F grade is based on, first, the achievement of the students in the school, then the growth of the students in the school, and finally, the growth of the lowest 25% of the students in the school. Because the growth of the lowest 25% is your achievement gap. And every school has an achievement gap, from the most advantaged school corporation in the state to the most disadvantaged school corporation in the state. And I believe that's a much more fair process, because a student only counts once. A disadvantaged student who is in the lowest 25% counts once, as opposed to counting in what could be up to 21 different subgroups against a school in a do not pass system.
Yeah, there are students who belong to more than one subgroup. And when you, right now under the present system, you measure, say, fourth graders at the end of the fourth grade, and next year you measure fourth graders, but they're different people, so you actually measure no growth at all under that system. Is that not the case?
In our growth model, you are measuring the children year over year. So you're doing apples to apples comparisons.
Good. I think that's one of the deficiencies of what we wrote, and I was part of that a few years ago, because these are different children we're measuring.
Right.
But if you can show the growth in that child, that would be a more valid measurement of how much progress has been made, because you're measuring different fourth graders each year rather than the same students in their growth pattern.
And you can actually get on, we have a website called the Learning Connection. You can look at every school corporation and every school in the state and see how their students grow. And it's a very powerful tool for parents. It's a very powerful tool for our educators. And frankly, again, we think it's going to be a game changer in Indiana.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank the gentleman. Mr. Gowdy, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to hopefully ask 4 questions, so I'll try to be concise with my questions in hopes with an expectation of an equally concise answer. Mr. Mitchell, I will start with you. I wrote this down, that feds can provide cover for local authorities. Cover from whom?
I think Ms. Keegan and I are on the same page on this. In too many local decisions, entrenched interests, institutionalized interests,
such as
gridlock the system. Well, I'm a great example. I think that I'm currently a defendant in a number of lawsuits that include everybody from the Administrators Association to the California School Boards Association to the Teachers Union to cafeteria workers. So I think that there are substantial interests from across the board, and there's plenty of responsibility to share.
Fair enough. Ms. Keegan, I went to the worst school in South Carolina last week, and I was curious to see what it looked like. And I walked in, and there are kids in wheelchairs and helmets, and there are teachers trying to teach them to avert their eyes to express a preference, and yet they're tested on geography just like my children would be. And they fail, and the school is given a failing grade, and the property values go down, and the school gets a bad reputation. What words of encouragement can I take from Washington to the teachers who work so hard there that there's going to be relief and change from Washington and how we grade success in schools?
Well, Mr. Chairman, sir, I would advise that we find the school in the country that's doing the best job with that group of kids, or with that mixture of kids, and find out what's going on. First and foremost, you want to make sure that we are doing everything we can for kids at every need level, but that we're not, whatever it is we do in terms of assessing kids, we don't artificially penalize a school when it is doing the best it can and getting a result. And as Dr. Bennett and the panel's been talking about, growth allows you to look at where you start and where you end up. What we can't do is leave kids invisible. It's a very fine line. If we don't test them, they're invisible, and then we don't have to do anything with them.
But you would agree with me, it is sheer lunacy to test children who cannot avert their eyes to show a preference on the geography of the regions of the state of South Carolina.
I'm surprised, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Gowdy, I'm surprised that those students are included. There's an exemption at 1% for severe students, I'm very surprised that that student would be tested if really their only communicative modality is a version of eyes. I mean, I'm a speech pathologist when I had a real life, and I don't see that should be the case. So maybe we just need to talk to the school.
All right, thank you. Mr. Coulson, I heard parental control, I heard parental choice. The one phrase I have not heard is parental responsibility, and perhaps I am a minority of one, but I think it is fundamentally my responsibility to produce educated children to society. Am I wrong? And aside from prosecuting educational neglect cases, which I have done for 16 years, what can be done so we shift the paradigm from it being our responsibility to produce educated children to parental responsibility to produce educated children?
Not only is parental responsibility paramount, but it's affected by the structure of the school system. When parents have no authority to control the nature of their children's education, who teaches their child, what they're taught, when they go to school, where they go to school, parents are naturally disenfranchised. They have no power, so they disconnect from the system. You have many cases of young parents who have young children starting out in elementary school who think that they have some sort of input, and they burn out within the first few years of school when they realize that the system does not need to respond to them. What changes that is when parents are in the driver's seat. When parents, either with their own money or through a scholarship, are paying for their own children's education, it is absolutely unavoidable for the school to respond to them and to heed their wishes, because it's in the financial and professional interest of the schools to heed those wishes. When parents are empowered in that way, they become more involved. It's like exercise. You know, when you have having responsibilities breeds responsibility. So we need to increase the amount of responsibility parents have in their children's education.
Mr. Chairman, I see the caution light. Thank you.
Wow, you are to be commended. Thank you for yielding back. It's probably my fine example. Mr. Andrews, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Chairman, thank you for calling this hearing, which I think is very instructive and addressing a very important problem. We appreciate that. And thank you to the 4 witnesses, really outstanding. I'm thinking this morning about a girl who's in 7th grade who shows amazing potential in mathematics. And she might be able to start to do high school level work or even eventually college level work in mathematics, but she lives in a town that couldn't afford to bring in a math teacher who could help her do that. Or she's in a class of 25 or 30 peers who couldn't possibly keep up with that, so she's standing still. And Ms. Keegan, one of the ideas that you touch on, and I know Dr. Bennett's group touches on, is the use of online learning as a way to address the needs of that young woman. I'm familiar, Mr. Mitchell, what Stanford University has done with its EPGY program in this regard. That you open up these horizons for children in very exciting ways. And I wanted, Ms. Keegan in particular, if you could give us some recommendations of what you think we should do with online learning options in the reauthorization No Child Left Behind.
Well, I appreciate the question, because there are a number of places where we don't even realize that they're going to run into a wall. So the number one thing I would suggest is to keep a very open dialogue with organizations like INACOL and others that represent online learning in America, because we've got 4 million kids going to school online. Half the states right now offer full-time online learning for their students, which is something you probably know, and I think we're at 45 at least who are offering at least some coursework.
Can I ask you a specific question? And I agree with those suggestions. As you know, under the present iteration of No Child Left Behind, if a school doesn't make what we now call adequate yearly progress, there's a menu of options among which it must choose.
Right.
Do you think that we should include an online learning alternative as one of those options that schools should have to look at?
I do. An interesting thing about the recommendations is that we offer that parents can choose a different governance system. And what's happening out there is that governance is sort of blending. Online schools are sometimes private, sometimes charter, sometimes. So I think we need to be aware. You don't want to accidentally not give people options. So I would absolutely think that's a fabulous.
Mr. Mitchell, would you give us some recommendations in this area?
You bet. So I think a couple things, and I want to applaud Indiana and several other states who have cleared away their seat time requirements and their fixed student-teacher ratio requirements. I think the next block to fall is, just as you suggest, competency-based credit, to allow students to move along at their own pace. As we speak, there's a terrific experiment going on near Stanford with Khan Academy, an online group that we help support. And in a fifth grade class that's been using Khan Academy only since the fall, the spread of kids is enormous, and there are kids in that fifth grade class who are doing algebra today.
One of the problems, frankly, is cash flow to support this. You know, some parents have the wherewithal to make these resources available to their sons or daughters. Many do not. What would you think about the idea of freeing up Pell dollars to be used by these kind of students for early college courses, you know, that are offered by some? Now, what if a really talented, this young woman, by the time she's a junior in high school, could do college-level math? What do you think of the idea of letting her use part of a Pell Grant early so she could do such a course online?
Well, she's taking college coursework. I think I don't want to speak for you, Ted, but I think we'd probably agree that what we're trying to do is do away with barriers that are artificial. It's an artificial barrier to say you have to be in high school for 4 years. So the point at which
one other barrier that I worry about, that I've heard from colleagues at Stanford, is that they wanted a person to teach an economics course who would run a hedge fund, a successful one, back when we used to have successful hedge funds. And he was not eligible to teach the course in economics because he was not a highly qualified teacher under California law. Might we suggest a way to fix that problem?
That's up to Mr. Mitchell.
So thank you. So that's an enormous barrier, and it's not only a barrier for people who are highly qualified in their intellectual domain, but it's also a barrier across states, across state lines, because credentials are not automatically transferable across state lines, and both of those issues I think are ripe for this committee and this Congress to take up. I think that online learning is a powerful tool. Hybrid, blended schools.
Dr. Bennett, I have less than a minute, but you can use all of it. Last second.
My question would be more: why are we talking about highly qualified as opposed to highly effective? Okay, highly qualified means there are inputs, and you are judging the professional by their inputs. And we do that in an antiquated system that we have today, where we say we pay teachers on years of experiences and degrees held, and you get these things by, you know, how many education courses you take or what have you. Let's put these decisions in the local hands. Let's have data-driven evaluations that identify teachers as highly effective, because we know highly effective influence the lives of children. Highly effective teachers influence the lives of children more than just simply highly qualified teachers.
Thank you. I yield back the balance of my carefully conscripted 5 minutes.
I thank the gentleman. Mr. Barletta, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Dr. Bennett, you touched on something here. As you know, no factor under school control affects student achievement more than the quality of the teachers in the classroom. Poor teacher quality, especially in the early grades, can affect a student's education for a lifetime. Since you took office in January 2009, you have proposed to eliminate teacher tenure. Now, you talked about rewarding teachers through the teacher quality bill. Can you please shed light on this initiative and others like it that aim to place quality teachers in the classroom?
Well, first, thank you for asking. This is part of our Putting Students First education reform agenda. And it again goes to this issue of a teacher effectiveness, in that our new teachers coming into the system would have to have 3 out of 5 years effective or above evaluations to achieve what's called professional status. Until that time, they're probationary teachers. And then if they get an ineffective evaluation, they go back to probationary. So it's earned in, earned out. And a second ineffective evaluation makes that teacher eligible for dismissal by the local school corporation. And we also would like to tie the teacher's professional development to those ineffective evaluations. So the principal says you were ineffective, we're going to target professional development, and then we will also, in essence, reward the teacher by saying you can use that professional development to improve your ineffectiveness to renew your license. So it becomes a situation where we are targeting teacher effectiveness for the benefit of student performance.
My district is home to a multitude of higher education institutions, community colleges, public and private universities, and for-profit schools. In your expert opinion, what are the benefits of partnerships between the universities and the K through 12 school system, and how has the state of Indiana embarked on such initiatives?
Well, we have a number of initiatives going on to promote higher ed attainment in high school. And I think going back to the slide I showed where we want 25% of our students graduating with advanced placement, international baccalaureate, or dual credit. So we are really, we have a dual credit advisory committee that our Commissioner for Higher Education, Teresa Lubbers, and I co-chair, where we are trying to clear out pathways so that students can attain dual credit in high school. We have a high school in Northwest Indiana, Crown Point, where the principal there is doing phenomenal work, and he has done it by making the dual credit opportunities accessible by price point. What we know is that students and parents will engage in dual credit opportunities if they're affordable. And he has made this available through a partnership with Indiana University Northwest and Purdue Calumet by offering dual credit opportunities at $25 a credit hour. That is a very accessible amount. The other thing is to make teachers accessible. You know, we have teachers in our state that could teach dual credit courses. And many of our teachers are not allowed to teach dual credit because of some barrier the universities put up, but yet that same teacher can go to the university after hours and teach adults. Now, that doesn't make sense. So we need to remove those barriers so that our students have access to the professionals and have a cost-effective access to dual credit in high schools. We're also proposing legislation to allow students to leave high school after their 11th grade and use some of the tuition support to go to college early.
Thank you. Mr. Coulson, I don't have much time, but the literature is mixed in regards to a direct correlation between education spending and student academic achievement. However, I think we can all agree that how the money is being spent is the most important factor in this debate. What specific education programs, besides the DC Opportunity Scholarship Program, which you touched on, do you think we should continue funding at the federal level?
I think I could just yield back my time by not answering that question. I'm not aware of any other federal program that is proven to be both effective and efficient with anywhere near the quality of research that supports the Opportunity Scholarships Program. If I found that there was such a program, then I would be very much in favor of a constitutional amendment to make it possible to grow such a program. But indeed, I find that apart from the district program, there's really nothing that the federal government has done that has been proven to increase achievement.
Very interesting. Thank you.
Mr. Scott, you're recognized.
Mr. Coulson, could you provide the research that documents what you just said? Because the findings I've heard about the DC voucher program suggest that some schools are good and some are bad, and that on balance they're no better than the public schools. So could you provide the research?
Yes, Congressman. The study I'm referring to is the most recent of the studies commissioned by the Department of Education and completed by Dr. Wolf and his colleagues. It finds that student academic achievement is as good or better than that of students in other schools. The difference is not statistically significant in academic achievement. However, the
difference
as
good or better, and the same, you could say the same as good or worse.
No, you couldn't actually. The effect is positive. It's just not large enough to be statistically significant. And as for the effect on graduation rates, it is both positive and statistically significant.
And does that account for selection bias?
Actually, there's very little selection bias in this kind of study because it's a randomized control trial. It's like a medical experiment in which you randomly assign students to the
if you could provide
treatment and control group.
research, because a lot of research has come up to a different conclusion. I'd like to ask the panelists just a general question, because whether you do something in a charter school or private school or public school or flexibility or no flexibility, when the dust settles, you want what's going on and you assume it's going to be a classroom. What do you need to provide a quality education, and do we know?
So I'll start, and maybe we can just kind of run down the line. I think that one of the things that Dr. Bennett said at the outset is critical to this discussion is that it's the most important thing to understand is that it's no one thing, that it's a collection of very complicated, interdependent effects that need to be managed carefully, and that they need to be managed best at the place where students and teachers come together, at the school and the local community. Strong culture, high expectations, a strong reliance on data to provide continuing feedback on how kids are doing and how the adults in the system are doing, accountability for results, that is for kids, it's for parents, and it's for teachers, and absolute transparency about how money is being spent, how resources are being used, and the outcomes that those resources are yielding. Well, that would be my recipe.
Well, let me ask a follow-up question on the effective teachers versus the qualified teachers, because this is something we've been trying to grapple with. Can we effectively measure when we have an effective teacher and when we don't? Some of the measurements that are presently being used, I understand, aren't much better than random as to who's effective and who isn't. And is there evidence that a teaching background actually helps? You need a subject matter background, but the teaching background, I would think, would help too.
Well, I would first say that the issue in regard to evaluation instruments, I think that is a huge issue that we are tackling today across all states. I think what we know is what we're doing doesn't work. Indiana is no different than the rest of the nation. Indiana has 99% of its teachers are rated effective or above. Now, I think we all know that in a state where you have 60 or 70,000 people, that's statistically impossible. So I think what we are saying is that you should have 4 categories, and I do like the 4 categories: highly effective, effective, improvement needed, and ineffective. And I do not ascribe to a bell-shaped curve distribution or a set percentage distribution, but I think here's a good indicator, Congressman. I think you have to take a look at school performance and human capital performance. You have to marry those two things, and that's why we're going A through F schools. Can a D school or an F school have 99% of its professionals be effective or above? And you have to have a transparent way and an easy way to marry school accountability and professional accountability.
I want to get in one more question before my time has expired, and that is everybody's shown charts about achievement gaps, and we've shown that everybody can learn, and I just wanted to ask if you could comment on the civil rights implications of educating one racial group to the 9th grade and other racial groups to the 12th grade.
I don't think there's any way to say it's anything but abysmal. We can predict by, unfortunately, wealth and by race in this country what achievement is going to look like, and that's poisonous for us.
And does that constitute a civil rights violation?
I believe the violation is that we assign families into failure, and that, I think, is a violation. When we know there are schools, we have a cure, and somehow we can't make that cure available to students. Instead, we assign them to schools we know have been failing for years. I believe that's the violation.
Thank you. Dr. Desjardins is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to wander down just a little different path than we have so far here this morning. And Dr. Bennett, because you were so kind to have the Indiana's Education Challenges slide for us, on one of the topics there, you said that only 58 cents of every education dollar goes to Indiana classrooms. I have a pretty good guess, but can you tell the committee where the majority of the other 42% goes?
Everywhere but classrooms. I think we also include capital costs, other costs associated with transportation, but also a lot of central office administration. And that's not a condemnation, but I do want to say this, sir. I mentioned Warren Township Schools, which is about 11,000 students in the school corporation. If you go around metropolitan Indianapolis, you will frequently hear every one of their administrators say, we have the best central office in metropolitan Indianapolis. It's also the leanest.
I think I've heard different numbers and different statistics, and you all can correct me, but I think roughly about $8,000 per student per year as an average for our public school systems. And I've also heard a statistic, and you didn't give me the answer, I hope, so I'll give it back to you. Roughly about 40% of our dollars go to busing in this country. And when you look at the 8,000 per student, that's a large piece of the pie. Do you happen to know what percentage in Indiana it is?
It is not that. I don't have the exact amount, but I will get that for you.
Okay. Does anybody else on the panel have any thoughts on that? We hadn't talked about busing in a while in education. I don't know if we perfected the system, but there was also a study done, and I'm not sure if it was Iowa or Michigan, but there was a busing strike. And it was interesting that during that strike, it was long enough that there was actually a noticeable increase in academic achievement in the schools. And so they studied that, and the reason behind that would be that the 20 minutes a day that the parents had their students captive in the car to and from school, they were more in touch with their life, what was going on, not only academically, but in their personal lives, and that did have a direct correlation with increase. So I would just propose, and if anyone wants to comment on what we might be able to do to look into the busing cost and see whether there are situations where parents can get more involved in the transportation process.
The way that we fund it is usually it's separate, as you know, Congressman. So it's mileage routes or whatever it is, and it's held out into its own budget. It is very high, and it would be worth looking at.
If there are no other comments, I'll yield back my time.
Thank the gentleman. Excellent examples being set. Ms. Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all for being here. I think we've spoken quite a bit about teacher effectiveness, and I want to go a little bit further in the teacher evaluation. Actually, Mr. Polis and myself have introduced a bill dealing with teacher evaluations that we hope will be part of the reauthorization as we move forward. But I think one of the challenges that we know is when we talk about teacher evaluation, somehow we want there to be the most optimum learning environment for children in that setting. And when you don't have good data, when you don't have a good growth model, when you don't have principals who know how to provide good evaluations, all those things make it, I think, difficult for teachers to buy into what we're trying to do. And I think what we're all talking about is a collaborative process so that teachers are the winners in that, and kids, of course, are at the center of that. How do you get there? Where do you get that buy-in? And do you think that absent the policy that's supported at the top of leadership, whether it's among principals or among teachers, that we can move forward with that? What would you suggest that we do to bring that together? And I think, Dr. Bennett, you've certainly spoken to it, as well as Mr. Mitchell and others.
Well, first, let me start by saying I don't know of a professional that doesn't want to be evaluated annually. And our teacher quality bill proposes that, and it is getting great pushback from our teacher unions. We have, to cite a newspaper article, I met with the superintendent of Indianapolis Public Schools last year about 6 of his underperforming schools. He identified with the teacher union representatives present that 60% of the teachers in those schools were ineffective. Yet we have far too many labor contracts in Indiana that don't allow these teachers to be annually evaluated. I spoke to a principal just this week who said after 5 years of service, he cannot evaluate a teacher unless they're really bad. And so I think we have to first and foremost say evaluation should be annual. I think we do have good data. I think student engagement, the Gates Foundation did a phenomenal study on what teachers believe is effective in evaluations. And I think we do have good data, and we should tap into that. But I would also say I think when we talk about this evaluation piece, we should be tapping our local school corporations to help us develop those tools, because I don't think 50 states can do it all by themselves. We have to have the centers of innovation at the local level.
Could you just follow up just briefly? Why did you go to these, when you talk about the local corporations, what is it specifically that they are?
Our school districts in Indiana, we call them corporations. I'm sorry.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Okay.
I'm very sorry. It's Indiana speak.
So the school boards themselves are developing.
Yes. school districts.
With collaboration between the different institutions, or
Well,
kind of on their own?
yes, I assume that will be the case. Again, this is an issue, again, in many of our labor contracts. The teacher evaluation tool, the teacher evaluation process are embedded in the labor contract.
Right.
So I think, once again, it's an issue where we must demand that professionals be evaluated annually and rigorously, and that the feedback they get's meaningful. And I think there is good data for that.
Mm-hmm. And it's it's not, I think we need to move beyond the rhetorical full stop about using evaluation to get rid of bad teachers. Mm-hmm. This is about creating a talent management system that helps the best teach the next best and helps build up the profession and helps teachers grow in areas where they need growth. So I fully support where Dr. Bennett is leading, which is that we need to experiment. We need to encourage local communities to develop different tools, different techniques. We need to learn from those. We also need to include organizations that are less constrained by collective bargaining agreements, that would include Catholic schools, independent schools, and public, many public charter schools.
Because I don't have much more time, in the reauthorization, do you all see that there is a carrot and stick approach to this, so that this is, I guess one could call it a mandate over a period of time, where you give people, a lot of help and a lot of support in developing those, but that at the end of the day, that we want to see that this is a process that all schools have, because if we don't have this scalability throughout the country, we're not going to get there, essentially.
I don't know why you'd want to do that at the federal level. I think what you want to do is get rid of the prohibitions. So let's just empty the big elephant in the room. Let's not have contracts that say you can't walk in a classroom and evaluate a teacher whenever you want, that you can't relate a teacher's assessment data to her performance, that you can't hire and fire teachers on the basis of their performance. That is in almost every contract in American schools. So the best thing to do would be to lift that up and be transparent about it, find out there are great evaluative processes. They're different all over the place, but what they have in common is the liberty to act.
Thank you.
Mr. Hunter, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First question, and set me straight here. You have about just under 100,000 K through 12 schools in the U.S. And from what I understand, correct me if I'm wrong, about 2,000 of those schools are responsible for about 50% of our dropouts. So my question is, when you talk about the OSP, or you talk about competitive grants, as those schools, those 2,000 schools that are responsible for the majority of our dropouts, as you break those down into urban, suburban, or rural schools, how do you see OSP or competitive grants being more effective in which area? And my question goes to everybody, if you don't mind. Thank you.
Well, I think that by encouraging the OSP at the federal level, you will encourage states to make similar programs around the country. There already are similar programs around the country. And those programs are helping kids in all kinds of different districts. And as virtual learning progresses, they'll be able to reach into even remote rural areas, as we discussed earlier. So just increasing the amount of choice and providing a model for the states on how to increase the amount of choice is going to help raise graduation rates, lower the dropout rate, based on the evidence we have to date. So I think set the model, and it will be followed, and it will be effective.
Mr. Hunter, I would add that, first of all, obviously strong accountability is number one. We can't allow those schools to operate if they're not serving children. That's number one. But we did something a little different. When we got to the department in 2009, we trimmed our staff by about 25%. And we took the savings from that, and with part of that savings, we actually offered our schools across the state a graduation rate incentive program. So the top 10 schools in the state that had the highest percentage of non-wavered graduations, we gave the improvement in their graduation rate. We gave those schools, we're going to give those schools $20,000 to distribute to the critical personnel who made that happen. So I think we have to get a little innovative. We have to think a little differently. We have to offer incentives for what works. We have to set high expectations. And again, I can't emphasize enough that when schools don't perform and kids don't graduate, we have to hold the school accountable.
How much time did you gauge that improvement over?
That was a 1 year.
And it was improvement, not total graduation numbers, but the improvement in graduation?
Yes, sir.
Gotcha.
And we have seen examples across the country, Mastery Public Schools in Philadelphia, that have achieved dramatic turnaround in one and 2 year periods, turning around those lowest performing schools, those dropout factories. It can be done.
Doing what, sir?
So in this case, a public charter school environment, so very different rules and regulations regarding the deployment of human capital and talent. But the creation of, as we've talked about before, extremely high expectations, no excuses for adults or kids, the development of a strong program with rigorous assessment and continuous feedback.
Just a comment, Mr. Hunter, about those schools, the Mastery schools in Philadelphia. When you interview the students and you listen to them, that's probably the most illustrative thing you can do, is to talk to a set of kids who didn't change, who stayed in place, and all the adults changed, and their life changed. And it's a lovely, lovely story that's going on there in Philadelphia, and that's just one example. There's thousands of those across the country, but that one is really, that's a great example.
And you've all named different programs that you've used or seen used to bring schools out of that funk, whether it's public charter schools or the incentivized program to have a higher graduation percentage. So when you look at OSP or you look at competitive grants, do you see either of those working better in certain areas, or is it one of those things where you suggest leave it to the local school district?
Yes.
Let the states and the school districts choose which one of those things would work better for them?
Yes.
Yes, and add to that those tools, the open enrollment and parent choice for alternatives to be created for the kids in those schools.
Thank you all. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back the balance of my time.
I thank the gentleman. I don't think I've ever seen a simultaneous nod by all panelists quite like that one. Ms. Woolsey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to this panel. Far too many of our nation's children go to school hungry or without proper medical care. Some come from unsafe homes, have to walk through unsafe neighborhoods. Many students don't have someone to help them with their homework at home or a place to go after school, actually. I believe that schools and communities need to be able to offer support services to children and their families so that children are ready to learn, and that's the operative word here, when they enter the classroom. Otherwise, how can a teacher be effective if their student body is not ready to learn? And so my question is, and we'll start with you, Mr. Mitchell, what are your views about the relationship between academic achievement and ensuring that children are healthy, well-fed, and safe, in other words, ready to learn when they enter the classroom? And should we strive for a common standard, possibly a federal standard, to provide these services, regardless of what school a child attends?
So clearly a child who comes to school with hungry and with aching teeth and serious family problems is going to be less able to attend to the academic enterprise than a student who comes well-fed, cheery, and well-scrubbed. There's no question. And we need to address that, and I think that Mr. Miller spoke eloquently about it a while ago. I think that a part of the issue that those kids face is a multiplicity of social service agencies that are not at all connected to each other to create the environment in which kids are ready to learn. So I would say that the first imperative is to work across the silos of public service to help those kids.
Can I ask you a question while you're
Please.
there? How do you see bringing those services to the school site where parents and children, everybody, it becomes a common ground? Do you see that as a logical place to provide these services?
I do. I think that that's one option. I think that the theme that I think we're all pushing is that is not a silver bullet. I think that that's one approach. Communities in which the social service agencies work together in their own areas, but use a common data system, for example, well protected to protect students' rights, but to be able to create a case map of kids. In the schools where we work, it's no surprise that extending the school day and providing some of those kinds of supports, but also the extended safe period for kids has become one of the trends that no one prescribed it has just grown up over time. And the research on extended learning time that's growing first out of Massachusetts and now in other states is quite compelling, that extended learning time can go a long way to addressing many of those needs.
So others on
I
being ready to learn when you enter the classroom.
As you may have guessed from all the charts in my presentation, I'm an engineer. My first career was in software engineering, but I'm going to break with tradition here and tell you an anecdote, which may get me kicked out of my geek clubs. But I have a friend I've grown to really love over the years who turned around a charter school in California. His name is Ben Chavis, and he now has 3 charter schools that he runs, and there are 2 others that follow the same model. In his charter schools, about 90% of kids qualify for free and reduced price lunches. He doesn't have a lunchroom. He doesn't participate in the Title I program because he doesn't serve lunch. And some children will come to him at the beginning of the school year and they'll say, well, you know, I can't bring a lunch. And so he tells them, well, you can either bring a lunch or there is a restaurant just 2 blocks from the school that will make a lunch for you every morning if you just go there and work for a couple of hours washing dishes on Saturday morning. He has never had a child take him up on that. All of his kids do bring lunches. And now this sounds draconian. I know it sounds draconian. And the only reason I think he was able to do it is that he grew up a often shoeless child of sharecroppers among a community of Native American Indians in North Carolina in absolute poverty.
Well, how old are these children that
This is a middle school.
Well,
this is a middle
how
school.
old are
and
they?
let me just finish the anecdote just to say,
Well,
this is the highest performing middle school in the entire state of California. It went from the worst school in Oakland in 2001 to the highest performing middle school in the entire state by 2007, and is still ranked near the top.
Ms. Woolsey, if I may, and I'm going to kind of go with Andrew, I'll get kicked out of the hard and tough club on this one. But, you know, I want to first, we have some school corporations in our state that have actually put health clinics. They have partnered with hospitals, immediate care centers, different social service organizations to provide these services for children. And what this comes down to, in my opinion, are courageous leaders who say, what is our core mission, and how are we going to drive resources to that core mission? So, you know, we have to make tough decisions. This goes to that statement about marrying fiscal policy and education policy. We have to put our money into the things that are going to drive results. Right. And these school corporations that have done this around the state of Indiana have had to make tough fiscal decisions to provide these services for children, but they've made a difference in the lives of those children.
The gentlelady's time has expired. Dr. Rowe.
Dr. Bennett, welcome back, and thanks to this great panel. You all have been fantastic, and there's not anybody, and Mr. Coulson, I want to point out that line that you showed that was going, I did not contribute to that. And everyone in this room on both sides of the aisle, I mean, there's not anyone sitting in this room that doesn't want the best for our students and our kids, and we want that, and we need that as a nation. And Ms. Keegan, I'm going to ask you and Dr. Bennett, you all hit on it, and anybody can answer it if they want to, about how do we retain our quality teachers? Because I'm a product of the public school system. First school I went to had 2 rooms, 6 grades, and 2 rooms and 1 teacher. A phenomenal teacher, Ms. Clark. I still remember her to this day. And I absolutely believe that's a centerpiece when you said that. And we've now got as many clipboard carriers as we do classroom teachers almost in our schools anymore. So 50% of the young people who enter that are going to be teachers never become teachers, and 50% of them after 5 years quit. How do we retain these folks?
I think first and foremost, we recruit from the top of universities for our teachers. I mean, teachers always loved schools. I mean, you've got to seek the geek. They love academics. They love schools. They had their hand up in the classroom. They wanted to be there. What we know about achievement is the one thing we can relate it to is the SAT score of a teacher. And so it's important that we do that. But I think secondly, and most importantly, we give them the liberty to lead. Because when you recruit from the top like that, you're recruiting people who have always sought to be the very best. And when they go into environments where they don't have the liberty to work the hours that it takes to come up with programs they would like to install, to take leadership because of what they do that's effective and not because they just lived long enough, they get thwarted our best. And fortunately, right now, what happens is they go around and they end run, and we've given them the opportunity to do that, and they usually go start a school. But we have to make sure that we leave teachers at the center of this enterprise. And as Mr. Mitchell said, there's no place in this system for somebody who doesn't want to work the hours that it takes. In this day and age, when we have a huge problem, we need all of that incredible passion that comes to bear in great teaching, and we just can't keep thwarting them with regulations that are calcified and just wear them out.
I have a lot of patience as teachers and had an opportunity. My wife taught in an inner city school in Memphis when I was there, in medical school. And then we moved to a community where every child's parent had a college education in public school. Well, those all looked like good teachers because all the kids did well, because guess what? The parents insisted on the fact that their kids learned. They read to them. They did all these things. So I see teachers, good teachers, in schools where they don't get to pick who their students are. For instance, to me, the most distressing piece of testimony I've heard since I've been in this Congress is that 3 out of 4 kids dropped out of school in Detroit, Michigan. That's heartbreaking when you hear that, because that's a failed city, and that's a failure we can't live with as a nation.
Mr. Rowe, if I may, I think it's I have a lot of passion about this, because now I'm going to go back to my hard and tough position. We have situations in our state, and I'm just going to tell you a very quick clause of a union contract that exists in Indiana. If you and I were hired on the same day to teach 5th grade in this school corporation in Indiana, and we had to reduce the budget, and they had to make a decision which one of us leaves, they add up the last 4 digits of our Social Security number, and the person with the highest sum gets to stay. That's why we are recommending, as part of our legislative package, that teacher contracts be limited to wages and wage-related fringe benefits, so that we can start recognizing and rewarding our greatest teachers. I think the saddest thing about education is the happiest financial day in an educator's life is the day they walk out the door. Yeah. And that's wrong. So we have to build a structure that allows us to recognize and reward the greatest teachers we have. Today is my triplets' 25th birthday. I called them this morning and wished them happy birthday, told them where I was going and what I was doing, and I said, what would you say? And they said, Dad, my son said, Dad, Miss Bartley was the greatest teacher I ever had. Trish said, Dad, Miss Deaton was the greatest teacher I ever had. And you know what? Those 2 teachers should have made $100,000. And it's a shame we have a situation where collective bargaining agreements are there for the benefits of adults and not to uphold the learning of children.
I hope you called your wife this morning, too, Stripley.
She was 4th.
One last question very quickly to Mr. Mitchell, and I've heard this bandied around, don't know whether it's true or not, that in California there are as many administrators as there are classroom teachers in the education system.
I don't know the answer to that. I'd be happy to find out.
I hope it's not true. But
we'll,
thank you, Pam. I'll yield back.
I'll find out.
We'll all hope.
It seems like it.
So
it's just school board staff. That's the.
All right. Ms. Hirono.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. As we focus on evidence-based educational reform, there are 2 areas where there's a lot of evidence that these are the areas that truly will make a change in a student's ability to succeed in school and in life. One of these areas is quality early education. And there's a lot of evidence to say that every dollar we spend on quality early education will not only enable that student to succeed in school and in life, but it really brings back to it gives back to us many times fold in terms of dollars. So. Dr. Bennett, you did not mention early education, the quality early education, as important. Do you consider it to be a foundational aspect of a child's education?
Yes, I do, and I would tell you, sadly, that Indiana ranks fairly low in terms of our full-day kindergarten and preschool early childhood education. I do think that it's very important, though, two things I think I need to say. First, it's very important that we don't see that as a silver bullet. You know, because, again, I think we have gotten into this thing that we have to keep pushing down the responsibility of when kids get ready. And I don't think that just preschool or early childhood education is going to fix the current system.
Oh, I completely agree with you, because there is no silver bullet to anything. We have to do a range of things, but this is one that there's a lot of evidence to show that it's important. So if the federal government were to provide, for example, grants, because every state is in a different place in terms of support of quality early education, if the federal government were to provide grants to encourage states to move toward providing quality early education, would you consider that to be a helpful thing for the federal government to do?
Depending on how it was structured, yes.
Well, leaving it to the local entities, by the way, not for the federal government to prescribe what quality early education should be, except in the most general ways.
I could see that as positive.
Dr. Mitchell, would you agree that quality early education should be something that the federal government should provide some support for?
I think that support would be helpful, but I think that the word that's complicated in that is quality.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think just at the time when we are beginning to develop real transparency around the outcomes that we want, and then giving local agencies and organizations the freedom to pursue those outcomes, I would hate us to then move into an early education environment without a clear set of
I agree with you. Just as we're wrestling with what makes for an effective teacher, that there should be some kind of a, quantitative way to do that, to ensure quality. So that gets me to the other area where evidence shows that the teacher standing in front of that classroom is the single most important person affecting student learning. So the effectiveness of that teacher is really important, and as we struggle with what makes for an effective teacher, there's not a lot of science behind what makes for an effective teacher. And so I wanted to ask Dr. Bennett, you seem to already have moved toward doing an assessment of your teachers based on effectiveness, and I wanted to ask you what exactly goes into whether or not a teacher, where that teacher ranks on the effective, ineffective scale.
Well, first, we have a model that we took a great deal of national research, Charlotte Danielson, a number of other education experts in the field of teacher evaluation, and we've developed a model. But I want to be clear that the state is not going to prescribe that. We are going to set some guidelines and guardrails. Student engagement, student growth. You can use growth on, you may use other standardized tests, ACT, SAT, and then there will be a number of subjective, the principal evaluation, it could be peer review, it could be parent survey, student survey. So we would like at the state level to offer our local school corporations, school districts, a menu of guidelines and guardrails to build their evaluation systems so that, again, we can take those and spread those best practices statewide.
So have any of your school corporations implemented any part of your models for effectiveness ranking?
We have, we're on like the 9th iteration, ma'am, of the model where we've gotten input from educators. We have a couple of school corporations who are piloting this. We don't have any data back yet, but again, this is all in proposed legislation right now, so we're hoping to have that in the years to come out of the legislative agenda.
I think the effectiveness evaluation, we have to get that right also, and so I commend you for your efforts. Part of effectiveness of teachers, though, is preparation, and Dr. Mitchell, I think your testimony alluded to the importance of teacher preparation, so can you talk a little bit more about what should go into teacher preparation? Because I think one of the criticisms is that a lot of the education, the teacher schools, I guess teacher training schools, are really back in the 20th century. So
I'm sorry, the gentlelady's time has expired, and I'm afraid that answer might be a little bit long. Mr. Rokita, you're right.
I'll talk to you later.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the witnesses' time today. You all seem, as I read your testimony and heard you answer questions, I'm inspired, I'm motivated, I'm appreciative that you're in the education system, helping our nation's children. I especially want to recognize my friend from Indiana, Tony Bennett. In a previous service, I was Indiana's Secretary of State, so I had an opportunity to work a lot with Tony. And because of Tony, I also want to say thank you to Tony on behalf of my kids. Teddy, who's 3, Ryan, who's 1. As a result of your and others' efforts, my kids might have a chance to go to a public school. And the money that Kathy and I are currently saving, otherwise we might be able to use for something else. Thank you as well. Tony, you and I have talked about this fact. We both talk about it everywhere we go in the state, that schools should be for the kids. That not necessarily, they shouldn't necessarily be for the janitors union, or even the teachers union. They got to be for the kids if we're going to be competitive in the 21st century. Having said all that, I would still argue that education is this country's and our state's second biggest problem. And you all alluded to that a little bit earlier when you talked about what kids needed in schools. As Secretary of State, we adopted School 54, an Indianapolis public school. And I would send our attorneys, and we would go to read, and we'd participate in after-school events with them. And what I learned there was that it's very hard for a teacher, it's very hard for a school system to do their job when a lot of the children have no structure at home. They barely have a home. They might fall asleep on the couch watching TV at 2 in the morning. They may then have to go to school without a coat the next day. And we expect the system, and we expect these teachers to then educate. And some of the answers I heard you say earlier to this kind of problem were multiplicity in social services and breaking down the silo, longer school hours. I'd like each of you, maybe starting with Tony, to tell me if there's a way for us to use the school system, remembering that it's for the kids first, to help build the family, to help maintain the family or rebuild the family, rather than trying to supplant the family or take up the vacuum where the family should be, because I think disintegration of our families is actually this country's biggest problem.
And Mr. Rokita, first, thanks for your service to the state of Indiana. It was wonderful to serve with you, and you were a beacon of leadership in our state. But I also want to say, talk something about Dr. Mitchell talked about. Good schools, great schools, have positive feedback loops. That's something I think we all see in schools where we work and serve. When schools operate at a culture of very high expectations, the adults in the schools accept no excuses. And again, I worked with a very talented principal by the name of Sheila Rohr in a very impoverished school in New Albany, Indiana, who got in her car and went to pick up parents to come to parent-teacher conferences. Okay? She says, you must attend. We need you. Now, those are very difficult things to do, but you know what? Those schools generate a positive feedback loop. The students succeed, the parents want to be involved. The parents want to be involved, the students succeed more. But I think, again, it starts with us as state leaders developing a culture that every school in the state must attain at the highest level. And we have to do whatever it takes to make that happen. So I think that's how you support the family, is by having great schools that accept nothing but the best from their students, who will then go home and influence the family to be involved.
Kate, it's such a great question, and I would really encourage, we should give you as many examples as we can. There are so many schools that have figured that problem out, and it isn't easy, but they do it over and over and over again. There are brands of schools, Uncommon schools, the KIPP schools. There are little private...
KIPP schools, I was going to mention. They have a tripartite contract of some sort that brings the parents.
They do, and that's a feature of almost all of these schools, because
really?
where kids and families have not had the kind of structure that comes so naturally to families who've had it for generations. It's not that they can't get it or don't want it. I've seen in urban communities little tiny private schools where families are actually paying like $3,000 a year, and they get together around a church and they learn how to do that. So the schools themselves, it's all about the leaders in that school, and as Dr. Bennett says, a commitment to get it right. And what I hope we do is inspire people to believe it can happen, because you only do what you think is possible. And teachers in a classroom sometimes get to feeling like they're oppressed by this system and it can't be done. It can be done. And so contact one of us and just ask us where it's getting done. If you find a school that's not doing it, and we will find a peer to them. I guarantee you, same constituent students, same socioeconomics, whatever it is, and we can match them with a school that is just knocking it out of the park.
Thank you. The gentleman's time has expired. Mr. Miller has a second question he'd like to ask.
Thank you. I think there may be a question, but just a couple of comments on this panel, because I started out with a very broad question. But first of all, I want to say, Dr. Bennett, when you mentioned that you got your data system from Colorado, I want to say thank you, because I understand that's also a huge savings in money that you didn't think you had to do it from the beginning, that you could build on what something. I know they've made that offer to my state. I don't know if they accepted it or not, but they made an offer to a lot of states that they had a system that others could use. So thank you. It's nice to see two states working together. I asked the question in the beginning about flexibility and accountability, and it seems to me when I listen to the comments and the answers to the questions and the questions by the members, that a lot of this becomes very possible if, in fact, we do have, I assume it's going to be based upon a growth model, that we do have an accountable system that is real, that has real measurable goals and purposes to it, that it's not growth to nowhere, as my state tried for a couple of years a while ago, and that it's inclusive, obviously, of the entire student body, that it's inclusive of all of the students that we have a responsibility to. At that point, if it's a performance-driven system, then I think there's some comfort level at the federal level that we're meeting our mandate under this, what is considered obviously a basic civil rights law in ESCA. I would say on the question of choice, that is clearly very prevalent now, that wasn't prevalent then, and it's in many different forms, many different forms. As I said, from the internet to a private charter school, if you will. I don't know what the level of intensity is, but we have to be cognizant that these are very mixed districts in states, as Senator Enzi will remind us over and over. There is no real other choice in rural Wyoming, but there are options for rural Wyoming, and that we not start getting on our high horse about one or the other and suggest that the federal government should pick those, but understanding that this student population should move across a range of options, and parents and others have that available to them. I also think it's becoming clear, listening to the conversation over the last couple of years, that it's hard to think that you're going to have an ESCA bill that doesn't have something about evaluations in it. But I also think it's going to have to be evaluations that evolve. I think it has to be about evaluations that are inclusive, that have partners, that have skin in the game. We like to say the entrepreneurs, this is about skin in the game. Well, teachers got to have skin in the game. They have to have say in the game. They have to have stakes and outcomes. And I think that's very important. So we already see some large districts that have headed down that road, have put these in place, whether it's in Connecticut or Colorado or elsewhere or Illinois. But I think at the federal level, again, we have to be prepared that this is on a continuous improvement model. It's not all going to happen the first year. It's not all going to happen the second year. As you point out, you're on your 9th iteration of this. And I assume that means that you have to acknowledge, again, the buy-in, the participation, the commitment, the skin, the stakes by all of the parties, certainly within the district, but I'd say at that site. Because I go back to, as I started this question, I look at some of these large, and I'm from a more or less urban, suburban population, I look at the partnerships and the options that have to be created. You mentioned the health, it's critical in some of these neighborhoods. There is no other access except a real long ride to the hospital. But the county health systems and the public health systems believe they're getting a huge advantage by partnering with these schools. So those kinds of options. So I think this panel has been very helpful. Mr. Chairman, I want to thank you for the hearing. These are big, tough issues. A lot of them have really long tails in the Congress of the United States. But I also think that there's a lot of pathways that have been developed over the lifespan of No Child Left Behind. But again, I start out, it's clearly time to move on, and it's clearly time to take that data and see what we can do to help empower states and districts to take advantage of it, because the examples of success with the exact population that we lament and we express our concerns for are so compelling now and numerous, not enough. You know, this is a huge nation, and we're talking about 1% of the students who are involved in many of these options. But they tell us what's possible, and we ought to be about enabling what's possible with this. But I will always go back to the idea that that's based on a foundation of accountability, because I sat on this committee for 20 years where those outcomes were hidden. We changed tests at the state level every 2 or 3 years. We changed superintendents every 2 or 3 years. And parents that were at sea, the minute they were published in the newspaper for the first time, parents got an idea of what the hell was going on, and they started becoming interested in this. So thank you very much for participating with the committee. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for putting this panel together.
I thank the gentleman. Mr. Walberg.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I would associate my comments with previous Chairman, Mr. Miller, on this. This is an exceptional hearing, and frankly, it's worth all the work in coming back after my involuntary layoff, coming back to this committee to hear what's going on here, because frankly, nothing gets my excitement juices flowing more than hearing excitement about educating our young people. Being a parent who had the opportunity, but because I took it, to use all sorts of approaches in educating my own 3 children, whether it was public school, private school, homeschool, vocational school. I saw the benefits of having teachers and administrators who were committed to my kids, meeting them where they were at, and educating them to their fullest potential. To see my daughter, who academically was not as gifted, and she would admit that, as her 2 brothers, but has gone beyond them in academic achievement in her field, even into graduate studies, because teachers had the opportunity to do what they do best in educating my child. So I would like to ask a question, and that's in light as well, Mr. Coulson, of you just making me angry when you showed this chart, to think of what has been lost in educating young people over those years, with huge expenditures that frankly have been wasted if these statistics are right. More than wasted, they have been abused to our regret and our expense and our kids' future and advancement of this country. But let me ask this question, and any all could jump in, but I ask Mr. Coulson, you first. In keeping in mind an underlying concern that I want you to color your answer with, if you would please. What is the most effective place for the federal government in education? And I'm willing to hear stay out, if that's what you're feeling. You mentioned that we've spent $151,000 per student for a graduating class 2009, which is nearly 3 times that of what we spent for those in 1970. This increase resulted, if statistics are accurate, in decreased student achievement. Is there any other issue area where we see these alarming numbers as well, and what would you recommend we could do to change this trend?
My answer on what the federal government can do is obviously constrained somewhat by my view of the constitutional limits of its role, but really, in practice, it's not. We've seen $2 trillion worth of federal programs produce essentially no result in either gap narrowing or overall achievement, and so another federal program is not likely to do any better than this 45-year history, with the striking exception of the Opportunity Scholarships Program. And this is a really interesting situation because around the country there is growing bipartisanship in support for school choice programs, just like the Opportunity Scholarships program. But there is still some considerable resistance to these programs, some political resistance, some entrenched opposition. If Congress can get together and in a bipartisan way extend that program and grow that program, the impact that it would have on the ability of state legislators to produce similar programs, similar legislation, would be enormous. So for Congress to show that it so values this program and what it is achieving, despite the partisan differences that may exist over it for obvious reasons, I think that would be a beacon to the nation that would have a lasting and dramatic effect, improving education in this country.
Mr. Wahlberg, if I may, I would suggest that, again, we do live in a national and an international society. So to just say that, states have done a good job of setting their own standards to help kids be competitive in a global economy, it's folks like me that haven't held up their end of the bargain. We haven't held schools accountable. But I want to answer your question directly. I would like to see the federal government work with states as we want to work with our local school corporations. Set the bar high, set incredibly high expectations, put guardrails in place to ensure quality, enforce strict accountability. If we don't do the job, don't give us money. Give states the flexibility, just like we want to give the locals the flexibility to achieve the goals. And then the last thing is, please get out of our way.
So let me build on that. I agree. High bar, transparency, especially around kids who've traditionally been failed by the systems. Resources that are tied to results, but are flexible to states and from states to local districts. And what I would add would be support innovation, because innovation is a brave act, whether it's political innovation or creating new ideas and new enterprises that help kids. It's a brave act that needs to be supported politically and financially.
The gentleman's time has expired. I'm sorry, Ms. Keegan. Mr. Thompson, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks to the panel for your expertise on this very important issue we're looking at today. As I look at the competitiveness of this nation, the key factor of our succeeding in the future of competing is a competitive workforce. It's a qualified workforce. It's about preparing our youth to take those roles in whatever walk of life wherever they're led and wherever they go. And so this is such an important topic today. Dr. Bennett, in your testimony, you highlight Indiana's education agenda, putting students first. Now, how do the three pillars of the state's agenda work towards improving student access in either college or the workforce?
Well, first, the first issue is obviously teacher and principal quality. The ability to make sure that the folks who are leading our schools and teaching our kids are of the highest quality and delivering the best quality instruction based on standards that make them college or career ready. Two is to give the local school corporations the flexibility they need to innovate, as Dr. Mitchell mentioned, but holding them accountable so that kids from Gary get equal educational opportunities that kids in Evansville get. And finally, to give all children options. You've heard this. This has been a theme among this panel. Charter options, private school options. We are big that, and I think Indiana has proven this. In the last 2 years in tough budget times, we've increased our state's standardized test scores, increased graduation rate, and increased AP participation and success. Okay? So I only say that because competition in the system and accountability in the system and freedom in the system have worked. And that's how we are going to drive more success among our children, is to put those three factors into an education system and make it work.
Well, I certainly agree with you. I think those are principles that have worked in every industry in terms of success, ultimately. You had mentioned about equality, an issue that I look at very closely. I represent a very rural district, and Indiana, I think, demographically is a lot like Pennsylvania, very similar. We one of the issues, and I'm just interested in your observation of this, there's a tremendous discrepancy in terms of the amount of dollars that comes into per student in different school districts. And I see discrepancies between certainly rural schools and urban schools, but even between different urban schools. And some of the issues I've kind of come up against, I served a number of years on a school board. Education is very important to me, even with competitive grants, that rural school districts don't tend to have the resources to have the grant writers. And so I like anything with the word competition in it, but competitive grants don't tend to be competitive because they tend to be slanted towards larger districts with resources of people who are dedicated to chasing those dollars. Even formula funding I find is biased towards large schools, not necessarily large schools that have a high percentage of needs children, and significant discrepancies in dollars. And I'm not talking about spending more money. I'm talking about how the money is distributed currently. Any observations in that area?
Well, first, I'm going to go back to the comment I made earlier, and I think this is something we have failed at the federal level, and I think probably if you ask 50 state leaders, they would say we failed at the state level. And that is, and I'll use Indiana, on April 29th at the 11th hour when our General Assembly is about to end, as I sometimes say, the smoke will come out of the chimney, and 12 people will emerge from the fourth floor office and say we know how to fund education. And during this same time, we've had 12 people in another room talking about education policy. And they don't ever put those two things together. We've never married fiscal policy and education policy. And I think when we afford rural schools the opportunity to build collaboratives so that they're not applying by themselves, they compete. And I think we have to start looking at education, whether it's school choice, whether it's evaluation pay, we have to have the courage to marry fiscal policy and education policy. And we haven't done that because we always try to minimize the losers. And we have to say, in a system that competes, sometimes people will fall short.
Very good. Well, I think my time's about done, so I'll yield back the few seconds remaining.
I thank the gentleman. Mrs. Biggert, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I'm sorry I missed all of your testimony. I also have a markup in another committee, but I did want to come and at least hear some of your expertise. I was wondering about the race to the top and how maybe Dr. Bennett, particularly you, I understand that you turned it down. Is that correct?
We chose not to participate in round two.
Right. And I'm from Illinois, and so we had participated in both the round one and round two and did not receive it. But there were, and I don't think that this committee really had the opportunity to really have hearings on this, or before this program came from the Department of Education and from the top down, and we never really had anything to do with it before it came into effect. I would like to know maybe why you turned it down, or because we're always hearing, well, this race to the top is kind of now the template for the reauthorization of the K through 12, and how does that fit into this program, if any of you worked with it, or what, how effective is it going to be to help with our reauthorization?
Well, I'll speak very quickly to why we did not participate, and I don't want to sound boastful, but I do believe that at the end of this thing, Indiana will be a state that will get to the top without accepting the race to the top money and the strings that were attached. For Indiana, it was a decision that it's much easier for me as the state leader to work with our General Assembly, our courageous governor, to initiate the type of reforms that, frankly, Race to the Top talked about than it was to prove to the federal government we could implement those reforms.
Thank you. Anybody else have any comment?
Yeah, I'd just like to make a very brief comment, which is that the idea behind Race to the Top, one of the core ideas of it is excellent, which is having competition in order to satisfy a customer. And there being financial rewards for people who do a good job of satisfying the customer and no financial reward for those who aren't good. Mm-hmm. The only problem with Race to the Top is that the customer is the administration of the federal government instead of families. A system in which families are the customer and schools are competing to serve them is well proven by research both domestically and internationally as a great system for improving educational outcomes and efficiency. Having states compete to serve the federal government is not a proven way of improving educational achievement.
So can I dive in, because I want to express solidarity as a two-time loser ourselves in Race to the Top. And I want to juxtapose three of us. I want to juxtapose Dr. Bennett's experience with ours in California. And Ms. Keegan and I both talked, while you were off at the markup, talked about one of the important roles the federal government can play is in providing the kinds of incentives that make the politics different. Indiana is a wonderful example of a state in which, thanks to Dr. Bennett's leadership and the leadership of others, the reforms that he's been talking about today could move forward on their own. I'm sorry to say that California was not one of those states. And yet the leverage of Race to the Top, the creating the competition with some guardrails around it, broke open some of the most extraordinary reform policies in the last 25 years in the state. The original parent trigger legislation, allowing parents to charter schools, open enrollment in failing schools, the ability for the first time to connect the teacher database with the student performance database. Those would not have happened in our state without the federal government's incentive for us to move in that direction. That's that kind of political cover that I was talking about earlier that at times unlocks the gridlock that ultimately hurts kids.
It does, I think, have to do with the politics of the local state. And I would say that what happened, Race to the Top, is that there were a lot more changes before $1 was ever spent, because there was a lot of shovel-ready policies sitting around that couldn't get shoveled through because of the national organization opposition to it, and all of a sudden it got pushed through. Now, whether at the end of the day that continues to be a great idea, or should government always be in this role at the federal government, I think that's going to play out over time as those dollars actually get spent. But there is no question that dangling it out there pushed through a lot of great ideas that couldn't otherwise go through. Hopefully states will do them anyway.
Ms. Bigram, I would also add, if I could, the one thing that I would applaud the concept of Race to the Top is it was a great example of marrying a fiscal policy decision and an education policy decision. There were 4 big policy issues in Race to the Top, and there was money to those 4 policy issues. So I think it was a great example of that. It was just, as Ms. Keegan mentioned, the politics of our state afforded us the opportunity to move without it.
Thank you. Thank you. My time has expired.
I thank the gentlelady. I thank the witnesses. It's been an extraordinary panel and a fantastic hearing. Every once in a while I just luck into one, but this has been absolutely terrific. Yield to Mr. Miller for any closing remarks he might have.
Just thank you again, Mr. Chairman, for the hearing.
Okay. Again, extending my thanks to everybody in the room and to my colleagues, but particularly to the extraordinary panel. Thank you very much. There being no further business, the committee stands adjourned.